And you identified and empathised with the loss that they were feeling about their culture going?
I think so. I think I did. Yes, I think I did. And I could feel the fragility of the environment that I'd been dealing with. And somewhere through this, I was back, as ever, at Warburton Range, I think I was. And I think as the plane took off, I was looking at an old Aboriginal woman bending one of the little desert trees over, which is what they often do, and then they throw a bit of canvas or something against that, you know, to sort of an ancient way of making an Aboriginal house. And as she was doing it, a whirlwind came and blew it away. And it was then that I thought of that line. I don't know whether it's a quote or not, but the line came into my head, the rim of our brittle and disintegrating world. And everything started levitating, and that came into the paintings, and that went through to all the work of the later 70s and into the 80s, when it went even further into what I was calling the morphological phase, where all life and forms were becoming integrated. Both animal and vegetable and mineral were integrating. And it was that point, it was at that point when my daughter was down from Broome, and I said, well, I'll just show you some of these morphological works, and I had a lot of them. And they were down in the rear studio, and she sort of, when she saw them, she sort of started to get cross with me. And she says, well, what are you doing these mad works for? What are you doing this mad work? You say you're not going to exhibit it, you can't exhibit it, no one will ever look at it. It's going to be, you're just wasting your time and your materials. Why can't you at least do some simple graphic work that could go through my little gallery, you see? And she got really sort of angry, and I thought, that's funny. And then she looked at them again, and she said, but they're sort of Aboriginal, Mum. They're sort of Aboriginal. And then she sort of drifted on, looking at them as though she was seeing them. She's very sensitive to art, got a good knowledge of it, although she doesn't practice it herself. And she said, of course, if these were done by an Aboriginal, then they would get somewhere. But then she said, you'd never agree to doing that. You've always played things so dumb and so straight. You'd never sign things under another name. I didn't even answer her. And then I can remember we went for a walk around the river here, and I was just an extraordinary thing. We stopped under a currajong tree with some pink blossoms on it. I was just looking at the flowers, the way you do look at flowers, and I heard myself saying, you know, Mum, Perpetua, I'm not totally opposed to signing those morphological works under a nom de plume. And it was as though from that moment, Eddie Burrup appeared. With his name, the way he looked, the age and everything, and then that was the beginning of Eddie Burrup, which was now over 4 years ago.
And when you decided to tell the world that you were Eddie Burrup, did you expect a big reaction?
Not to that extent, not to the extent of the reaction that happened when the urban Aboriginals in Sydney were raised as an objection to it. I had the press of the world coming to my door. They said, oh, you've got to talk, you've got to give your side of the story. I said, I don't know what my side of the story is, I'm just not going to talk. And I didn't talk for 4 months, you see.
People have felt that because your knowledge of all of this has been passed to you culturally, and that you don't actually have, as it were, Aboriginal genes, that you have no right to be speaking about this or to be representing this work through Eddie. What's your answer to that?
Well, are you referring somewhat there to the idea of cultural appropriation? All I can say to that is that you can't appropriate something that was given freely to you as a gift. Both with my inner perceptions and my direct contact with the original people of Australia, it's been a gift that I hold, although I mightn't have a very black face, you see. So to a certain extent it gets into the argument of what is Aboriginal. Because, of course, some of the people challenging what I've done, with respect, I say, they're very little Aboriginal, and they have not had the privilege of the contacts that I've had with the ancient world.
Do you feel that Eddie Burrup to some extent came into being because you needed to be able to express what you were carrying from those days?
Yes. To that degree, that was what liberated me as an artist. I feel liberated. That's the nice part about Eddie Burrup. I'm happy doing Eddie Burrup. I'm thrilled to be doing it. The images come out and I'm getting them out. I'm working in quite a big form. And of course the big canvases are very demanding too. And the energy is coming from some source, I don't know. But I can't believe that anything that's given me such a wonderful resurgence of energy and enjoyment in the creation of images, it can't be coming from anything other than some benign source.
Did you mean to deceive with this?
When we get into that, you can easily track it down to there is deception there, but I didn't mean to. It was woollier than that. I didn't want to deceive. I didn't want to hurt sensitive Aboriginals, for heaven's sake. I didn't want to do any of those things. I didn't sit down and think out. The word hoax worries me terribly, really, because it wasn't a hoax. It was a device to get myself liberated, and it did liberate me. And I would like people to have seen it that way and say, what fascinating work.
And this is some of the best work you've ever done. Why did you give it to Eddie? Why not keep it for Elizabeth?
I don't think it would have worked through Elizabeth Durack. I would have been lost. It would have just sat out in the rear studio. It was Eddie Burrup that somehow brought it to life. I can't answer it. I simply can't answer it.
So he's really much more than a nom de plume. I mean, he's a whole character. You've written his life story. And it's really very striking, that you always talk about him in the third person.
Well, I've got lovely freedom between the two names, haven't I? Perhaps I can write all sorts of pieces for the press or journals under the name of Eddie Burrup, and they'll say, of course, that's Elizabeth Durack, so perhaps I can use him as a cover.
Do you feel you need a cover?
I think I did. I think I got very tired of being Elizabeth Durack that had been stereotyped as a relic of old colonialism, a relic of conservatism, daughter of a murderer. I'm very tired of that. Yes. And that was there, and no doubt that was one of the pressures. Although you can't quite rationalise it, but it might have been why I liked the idea of working under a nom de plume. So there it is. So what's the fate of Eddie Burrup, I don't know, or Elizabeth Durack. Remains to be seen.